entertain. Okay. Go right down the middle of the road.
Kevin, you're a host of Shark Tank. Wouldn't people say the same thing about you? You're a show of a host of an entertainment show.
Have you ever heard me shill for a politician?
Yeah, every night.
Kevin O'Leary, the Canadian businessman, Shark Tank personality, and one of Donald Trump's most reliable defenders on television, appeared on Abby Phillip's panel this week and confidently declared that entertainers should steer clear of politics altogether. According to him, the proper role of entertainers is simple: stay neutral, stay in the middle, and focus only on entertaining people. Then Ana Navarro stepped in with the question everyone watching was already thinking. She pointed out that Shark Tank itself is an entertainment program and asked whether that exact same standard should apply to him as well. And that is when the moment turned unforgettable. O'Leary, a man viewers regularly see on television defending Trump and weighing in on political issues, looked straight ahead and asked, "Have you ever heard me campaign for a politician?" The reaction was almost impossible to believe, because audiences have watched him do political commentary on this very network over and over again. The confidence behind the statement was so astonishing that laughter spread across the panel, because sometimes there is simply no other response when someone delivers a line that bold without the slightest hint of irony. Then Ana Navarro delivered what may have been one of the sharpest responses seen on live television in a long time. "Every night when you come here." 5 simple words, and suddenly the entire argument.
Good evening, I'm Abby Phillip. Let's get right to what America's talking about. A whole new world for the kingdom. Disney announcing that Jimmy Kimmel will return to the air tomorrow night after days of backlash over his suspension. The company has been facing heavy criticism after pulling him off the air over what Disney calls ill-timed Charlie Kirk comments. But after the Trump administration threatened to punish ABC unless they did something. Today, 400 celebrities signed a letter comparing it to McCarthyism, and some Americans said they canceled their Disney Plus subscriptions. Now, we're told that Kimmel will be addressing the firestorm tomorrow, but Sinclair, one of the big owners of subsidiaries, say it'll preempt the show from the stations that it owns. Joining us in our fifth seat is Bill Carter, the former New York Times media reporter and author of The War for Late Night. So, Bill, what do you think is behind Disney bringing him back?
Well, I think Disney was pushed into the corner here. They had to make a decision. They were either going to capitulate or they're going to fight. I think they decided, given all the other circumstances, they had already conceded on the Stephanopoulos issue. They had conceded to Trump and paid off a settlement to him. And here they were. They had to either decide whether they're going to keep this star that they did like, they do back, or they're going to capitulate and give in. And I think they had no choice. I don't think Disney had a choice. This was clearly an abuse of power, and they could not give in. Otherwise, it would continue, and they could just had to stand up for it, not just because of who they are as a company, but sort of as the principle of it. I really don't think someone like Bob Iger, who has taken his reputation very seriously, the head of Disney, by the way, was going to concede that he ought to now basically say, all right, I'll agree, and I'll take away a star who I don't think did anything that seriously wrong.
Backlash to the backlash to the backlash. I mean, I think at the end of the day, one of the big original sins of this whole saga is the Trump administration deciding to make it clear to the whole world that they wanted to be involved. I almost imagine if they had not done that, this would have ended completely differently. Kimmel and Disney would have dealt with this behind closed doors. Maybe he would have been suspended for a few days. They would have dealt with the affiliates and we would be moving on. But Disney was forced to respond to the assumption many people have, which is that this was an attempt of the government to chill speech, which I think, for a lot of Americans, they don't like that.
I've been doing television for a lot of years. The only thing that matters long term, ratings. Tomorrow night, who's ever writing that monologue for him, he's going to get his best score in decades.
Probably.
Everybody in America is going to be tuning in. They're going to score huge ratings, and that's what matters on TV. Secondly, to consider, I go back to an interview with Johnny Carson, I think it was in the early 80s, when he said, I don't get into politics because why would I want to piss off 50% of my audience? And I think all comedians should think about that. They're entertainers, and they want to entertain people who had a long day. They want to be lifted up, hear something funny. They don't want to be dragged down in the toilet of politics.
Michael Jordan said, I want to sell sneakers to Republicans too. I mean, what is this stuff? Entertainers entertain. Why get into this whole thing of partisan politics? I think that's the lesson of this Kimmel thing. I think he'll do very well tomorrow night. Long term, ratings will matter for him, like everybody else. But the lesson to everybody is, if you're an entertainer, a musician, entertain. Okay. Go right down the middle of the road.
Kevin, you're a host of Shark Tank. Wouldn't people say the same thing about you? You're a show of a host of an entertainment show.
Have you ever heard me shill for a politician?
Yeah, every night when you come here.
I shill for policy. I'm a policy wonk. I don't get on stage saying, vote for this man, this woman. I say, here's what their policies do to American entrepreneurs.
But you,
good, bad,
all right,
but
Pop.
You know what?
Kettle says hello.
Goodness, I'm
But
here.
Kevin, I mean, you are a guest here a lot, and I've heard you strongly criticize Democratic politicians. Maybe you don't shill for one politician.
Policy.
No, I know. I've heard you make personal comments about Democratic politicians right here at this table. But to Anna's point, you have free speech rights just like everybody else does.
Right.
Are they not allowed? You're allowed to do it? Why are comedians
Carson
not allowed?
Was down the middle mostly, but if you were president, he made fun of you. He made fun of you if you were president. He did politics, in terms of a joke. If you were president, you were made fun of. And the presidents did not then get their back up and say, we got to stop that. I don't like him doing that, because he was Johnny Carson.
And listen, one of the longest running comedy shows in history, Saturday Night Live, has been making fun of
presidents forever. Absolutely.
Of every, of
presidents
every
have always,
affiliation.
you know what? And Abraham Lincoln had political cartoons made about him, and he didn't say close down the newspapers.
I don't think SNL.
And if you were here in the 90s, Monica Lewinsky, Bill Clinton. Yeah. I mean, but the other thing, look, maybe what you're saying is true, but Sinclair, one of the owners of these affiliates, they were planning to air this lengthy Charlie Kirk special in place of Jimmy Kimmel. And guess what? They didn't do it. They backpedaled and they dropped those plans and aired Family Feud instead. If it was so crystal clear that viewers really wanted more politics, but just right-leaning politics, why did Sinclair back off that?
I don't know that Sinclair backed off of that. In fact, Sinclair has actually made quite a stand by saying we're not going to be we're preempting Jimmy Kimmel's show tomorrow
night. Right, but they were going to air on Friday a documentary. They said in their whole statement about Jimmy Kimmel, they were like, we're going to air this documentary instead, and then they didn't do it.
And I don't have an answer for that, but I can tell you this, the conversation at the table tonight has not even touched on the fact that what Jimmy Kimmel did was insult an entire half of the nation and a grieving widow and people who had lost someone that was dear to them and a voice that was lost to America. And this was not about free speech, about politics. This was about somebody making a horrible decision.
What was the insult?
It was a horrible decision for him to come out and say that the murder was unrelated to what it really is, a leftist ideology that attacks someone who is a conservative ideology. Everybody knows that. And instead, he insulted half of
Charlie Kirk,
but what he did was he insulted half of America that was in the middle of grieving over the loss of someone we revered.
But can I tell you something?
And that being said, you have to also look and say, what is the FCC even for?
But can I say something?
The FCC is a licensing body.
Last night, that grieving widow, with incredible grace and compassion that I think I wouldn't be capable of,
I agree,
came out and said that she forgave the killer
it was amazing.
of the man who killed her two babies. So I would say that if you're going to honor the Kirks, if you're going to honor what they stood for in terms of, and I disagree vehemently with a lot of the things he said, but he stood for free speech. And so I don't understand how the way to honor a man who stood for debate and free speech is to stifle free speech and penalize.
But the piece
I don't
you're
understand
missing,
how
Yeah,
we can admire Erica Kirk
piece that you're
for
missing
so
in this,
gracefully forgiving the man who killed the father
and the
of
piece
her
that
two
you're-
babies,
you're
and
choosing
we
to
can't
miss in this.
forgive a
The piece that
comedian
you're choosing
for
to
a
miss in
lead-in
this
to
is
a
the fact
joke.
that Trump is not the one who said get him off the air. Disney made a business decision. They have a fiduciary obligation to their shareholders, to their affiliate stations, and to their advertisers.
But Phil, we were all
And they actually
here.
did.
Phil, we were all here when the FCC chairman went on a podcast and said we can do this the easy way or the hard way.
Which is what
and,
the
and
FCC is
here's
supposed to
okay.
do.
Here's
No.
What?
No.
Okay,
no.
Let's. All right, hold on.
How many of y'all
Let me
have
just
read the
play
actual Communications Act of
Let me play what
1934
Rand
that
Paul had
established
to.
the
I'm going to play
FCC?
what Rand Paul had to say about
I
this
have to.
because he was asked specifically about Brendan Carr's comments and whether or not that's what the FCC should be doing. Listen.
Senator, do you believe that Brendan Carr's comments were appropriate?
Absolutely inappropriate. Brendan Carr's got no business weighing in on this. But people have to also realize that despicable comments, you have the right to say them, but you don't have the right to employment. And the FCC was wrong to weigh in, and I'll fight any attempt by the government to get involved with speech.
Right.
All right, so look, it's pretty clear. The FCC doesn't have a role in saying, oh, Jimmy Kimmel, I don't like what you said. We're going to threaten your broadcast license. And sure, ABC has a right to suspend their host, even to fire him. But by putting himself in the middle of that, which he did intentionally, that changed the game in this conversation. And I really do think it probably changed the game for Disney in terms of how they wanted this to end, in terms of how quickly they needed this to end and bring Jimmy Kimmel back.
No, I think that if we were to start with, again, the moment of forgiveness of Sister Erica, where we had a moment of interruption in a polarized society and really a spiritually decayed culture.
I think your microphone just slipped into your jacket. If you
Is that right?
Move it up. All right.
Yeah, what I was really saying was,
Okay. All right, I'll give you a moment to just fix your microphone, but I promise I'll come back to you.
Cornell
Okay?
is fishing for his microphone. I am very happy that this seems to be getting resolved, or it's moving towards a resolution, because you know, we talk a lot about Kimmel, we talk a lot about Colbert. They're going to be okay, but there are hundreds of people that work on those shows. There's over 200 people that work on the Kimmel show, and these are people that were hurt badly because of COVID and shows being with skeletal crews. These were people that were hurt badly by the writers' strike that hurt so many TV shows. And so, you know, it's not just Kimmel you're hurting.
Yeah,
and it's a lot of American families.
Go ahead.
I'm back. I appreciate that, brother. No, that when you have a moment of interruption, given the love of money tied to greed, bottom line, revenues and eyeballs, and the hatred escalating, deep distrust on both teams, Republicans and Democrats, how do you sustain that kind of moment of interruption? Because forgiveness is a form of love. John Coltrane's birthday tomorrow, love supreme. How do you sustain those moments to push back the forces of hatred, push back the forces of greed, push back the forces of distrust? And the only way you do it is by more examples in which people are able to say, I mean, Jimmy Kimmel, for me, you know, I don't spend a lot of time on the brother. I don't think he's the most talented brother either. Now, that's one of the few times I might agree with Brother Trump. He's not the most talented brother. And even that slot itself doesn't have too many people of color. So, I mean, they do what they want to do. But I will defend his right to speak. Just like I defend this brother's right to be wrong or right, because that's a libertarian issue. It's a libertarian issue.
And I think
it's an American issue, Cornell.
Well, it's a human issue. It
is the First Amendment to the Constitution. The First Amendment that was made to the Constitution was about freedom of the press and freedom of speech.
So we've dealt with
of slavery.
I know, but we have dealt with the legalities of it.
Absolutely, but it's human. I want to keep it at the deeper human. I don't want flag waving. I want love, justice at the center of it.
Listen, I to your point, right? There's a lot of legalities of it. I think it's super important to talk about what should the role of the government be versus what should the role of a private company be. But then there's Jimmy Kimmel, the comedian, the human being. What should he do? What does he owe the country in this moment when he does come back?
Well, I think he's going to come out and say something conciliatory. He's not going to apologize in a formal way, and he's certainly not going to give at the insistence of the Sinclair people to give a donation. I think that's kind of over the top. And he's a very strong-minded guy, Jimmy. I know him well, and he's a very good guy. He offered a very heartfelt comment to the family before any of this happened, by the way. So I expect him to be very strong, because he didn't bend here. This is an interesting thing. I think he would have been on the air already if he just came on and abjectly apologized. I don't think he's going to do that. I think he's going to try to clarify this and say, and I think he thinks that he didn't say anything that was the sickest conduct possible, which is the way the FCC guy said it. I think he was, by the way, he didn't know about the actual case, the prosecution's case on Monday
night.
So he was making a comment irrespective of that. So, and he's not the kind of person who would ever attack or demean a person after this kind of tragedy. So I think that's misrepresenting him. I understand people are hurt about it. I understand that. But I would not expect Jimmy Kimmel to be, prostrate with apology. Yeah, that's not his style.
All right, well,
I
we'll all
expect
be
him-
watching tomorrow night.
I want him to.
Before Ana Navarro dismantled Kevin O'Leary's position with a single sentence, it is worth examining the argument he was actually trying to make, because it begins falling apart almost immediately once history enters the conversation. O'Leary pointed to Johnny Carson as an example of how entertainers used to avoid politics and remain perfectly balanced. The problem is that history tells a very different story. Johnny Carson regularly made political jokes and never hesitated to poke fun at the people in power. Nixon got it, Reagan got it, Carter got it, and every administration eventually became part of the material because that has always been woven into the DNA of late-night television. Being in the middle never meant pretending politics did not exist. It meant everyone was fair game, regardless of party affiliation. Those are two completely different ideas, and Kevin O'Leary surely understands the distinction. The larger history only makes the contradiction more obvious. Saturday Night Live has spent decades parodying presidents from both parties and turning political figures into comedy material. That tradition stretches back generations. When those earlier presidents became targets, most of them accepted it as part of public life. George H.W. Bush reportedly appreciated Dana Carvey's impression of him so much that he invited the comedian to perform at the White House. George W. Bush spent years being portrayed as clumsy and confused in sketches, and largely took it in stride, because leaders understood that satire comes with the territory when you hold the most powerful office in the country. Trump wasn't ready for Jimmy Kimmel's. The reality is that public office in a free society comes with criticism, parody, and plenty of jokes at your expense. The moment you step into that role, comedians, late-night hosts, and satirists become part of the package, whether you enjoy it or not. The argument being made here is that Donald Trump approaches this very differently. Critics point to his calls for investigations into television programs and his repeated complaints about networks and comedians who mock him as evidence that he sees ridicule not as part of democracy, but as something that should be punished. The controversy intensified when reports surfaced about comments from the FCC chairman suggesting that media companies could resolve certain disputes the easy way or the hard way. Those remarks immediately sparked concern, because hearing language like that from a federal regulator in relation to comedy programming raised serious questions about government pressure and free expression. Even Senator Rand Paul, a Republican known for his strong support of free speech and limited government, publicly criticized those comments and argued that regulators should not be inserting themselves into disputes involving political humor or television personalities. When criticism of government involvement begins coming from voices across the political spectrum, it becomes much harder to argue that the concern exists only on one side of the aisle.
That brings us to the larger controversy surrounding Jimmy Kimmel and the outrage that followed, because the story quickly became bigger than the original comments themselves. The claim circulating was that Kimmel had somehow insulted enormous portions of the country because of remarks connected to Charlie Kirk. But supporters of Kimmel argued that the reality looked very different from the narrative being pushed online. Charlie Kirk was certainly a well-known figure within conservative media circles, especially among politically engaged audiences and college activists, but many Americans outside those spaces were unfamiliar with him. Jimmy Kimmel's audience, on the other hand, reaches a broad and often older television demographic that does not necessarily overlap with political podcast audiences. According to critics of the backlash, what followed looked less like spontaneous public anger and more like a highly coordinated campaign that rapidly elevated the controversy into a national political flashpoint. Within a remarkably short period of time, Charlie Kirk was transformed into a symbol